Hello and welcome to Integrative Process Psychotherapy, a human way of understanding what we do as therapists. In this video, I want to explore something at the very heart of therapy, what you might call the context within which therapy happens, the therapeutic relationship. Relationship is not simply another part of therapy. It is the foundation of our work. It's the framework of change, and often the healing force itself. It's also complex with many layers, dimensions, and depths that we don't always name explicitly. First of all, I'd like to talk generally about human relationships. Human beings are born into dependency. They arrive not as finished individuals, but as vulnerable organisms that require particular qualities of relationship in order to survive and develop. A child needs physical care, food, sleep, cleaning. It needs protection from accidents and other people. It needs a consistent and predictable routine, particularly in the beginning. And it needs emotional attunement by the parents. As it grows up, it needs increasing mental and physical stimulation. But more than all of this, a child needs a relational environment that responds accurately to who they are. That means a caregiver who can notice and pay attention, who can feel and express those feelings authentically in a real way, and who can respond appropriately to the unique needs of that child. When this environment, this relationship goes well, when it's good enough, in Donald Winnicott's terms, the child develops an enduring sense of safety in the world and with others. They develop an ability to enjoy being alone without distraction, a capacity to regulate emotions and reactions, and a basic trust in human relationship. In contrast, when it doesn't go well and the relational field is inconsistent, intrusive, neglectful, or emotionally absent, the child has to adapt and manipulate their own essential nature in order to survive. And through this adaptation, they often become overly compliant, emotionally needy, withdrawn and distant, hypervigilant and untrusting, or emotionally cut off. These adaptations are not random. They are relational strategies that reflect how that person learned to endure in the presence of important others in their environment. We see this in different attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. And as outside, so inside. Outer relationships are a reflection of our feelings about ourselves, and feelings about ourselves are a reflection of our outer relationships. For example, a client presents with chronic anxiety in social situations, social anxiety. But as we explore deeper, we discover they had a parent who was unpredictable. There were moments of motherly connection followed by sudden withdrawal. There was subtle emotional manipulation and invalidation. And out of this developed a self-image of never being good enough, and these inner voices which are critical. So now in adult relationships, the client's system is constantly asking themselves, am I safe? Is this person going to leave or hurt me? Am I good enough to be loved? The anxiety is not only a symptom, it's a relational signal that has been built into the person's way of being. We often think of emotions as internal states, but from a process perspective, emotions are the felt experience of relationship with ourselves and with others. So happiness and joy is a sense of being connected to ourselves and significant others, while anxiety is a perceived threat to well-being and important relationships. Shame may be seen as a negative evaluation of ourselves and a fear that we're being evaluated negatively by others. Sadness, depression is a loss of connection to ourselves and to the world. Anger is complicated. Anger can be a defense against vulnerability. It can be frustration at having our needs and desires blocked, or it could even be resentment that the world is so harsh and unjust. So when a client says, I feel something, but I don't know exactly what it is, we might understand that as I'm perceiving something about inner and outer relationship, but I cannot articulate it yet. Many clients simply do not have the vocabulary to describe feelings and relationship accurately. Because of this, clients come to therapy not just for insight or symptom relief, but for something deeper, relational repair. They are often unconsciously seeking a different kind of connection to themselves and others, a new emotional experience, a relationship that feels alive and real. And of course, they want to be seen and validated for who they are. As therapists, we have to meet these challenges and be there fully present and available. The therapeutic relationship is unlike any other. It doesn't fit neatly into familiar categories. You could say it's not friendship, but it can be warm, human, and friendly. It's certainly not family, but it can be emotionally intimate. It's not purely technical, but it's purposeful in service of healing and growth. One defining feature of a therapeutic relationship is that it's asymmetrical. The therapist holds more responsibility, more structural control, and certainly more awareness of the process. This asymmetry can be difficult for clients, but it's not a flaw. It's what makes the therapeutic relationship possible. Some clients find it confusing and troubling because they can experience it as a loss of control. And in those situations, it's important for the therapist to really work with those issues. I'm going to use a simple metaphor for the therapeutic relationship. Think of it as a vehicle, a purpose-built medium of transport specifically designed for psychological exploration and change. For it to function well, it needs certain things to be in place. It needs structure, a clear framework, which includes session times, boundaries, agreements, and certainly confidentiality. Without this structure, the vehicle is in danger of falling apart. Within the structure, it needs safety. It has to protect the vulnerability of the client, who brings fragile emotions, painful memories, and often disowned parts of themselves that they're unaware of. So the relationship has to be strong enough to hold and contain these fragile aspects safely and consistently. A third aspect of the therapeutic relationship is responsiveness. The therapist must be able to slow down, kind of like applying the brakes. For example, in deeper work, I may change the subject and talk about superficial things for a bit, and it gives the client a kind of a rest, a sense in which they can relax a little bit. Other times, we need to speed up the process if the client seems to be dragging their feet. We need to increase intensity. So you could think of this as the gas or the accelerator. And this is when a client needs to go deeper. Another aspect of steering, of course, we've got to keep the therapy on track and be able to maneuver it as needed. So we follow the process as it unfolds, but also we often need to redirect the process into places that are going to be much more useful and vital. Unlike a normal vehicle, therapy has a shared navigation. So the relationship, if you like, has shared controls. Early on, the therapist guides more. Later, the client takes responsibility for where therapy is going. For example, an early client might say, I don't know what to talk about. So the therapist asks orienting questions, offers some structure or a plan, and helps to identify starting points. Later, that same client may say, I think I want to talk about something I avoided last week. Now the client is initiating the subject, directing where the relationship will go, and actively participating in the process. Sometimes the vehicle needs to go what you might call off-road, go beyond the known territory when we're moving into trauma, into ambiguity, and into the unknown. So the relationship has to be robust and resilient in order to tolerate uncertainty, disorganization, and emotional intensity. Therapy can sometimes be quite a bumpy ride, both for ourselves as therapists and for the client. In the last video, I talked about the dimensions of process. Well, I'd like to use a similar model when I'm talking about relationship. So we'll talk about outer relationship, inner relationship, deeper relationship, and greater relationship. Outer relationship is what I might call foundational trust. The outer structure, which is the container. It's the practical, visible structures of therapy. It includes scheduling, fees, and we have to be comfortable setting fees and also negotiating a fee as necessary. Of course, it has to include confidentiality, and that needs to be strictly adhered to. Boundaries need to be clear about what is appropriate and acceptable in terms of timeliness, payment, cancellations, etc. And the therapist has to be ethically clear to know when there's a danger of enmeshment or dual relationship, or to know when they step up if the client is a danger to themselves or others. Why do these things matter? Because this outer dimension creates predictability and trust. Without it, the client cannot relax into the deeper work. So, for example, a therapist might reschedule the appointment time at the last minute, and that causes the client to begin to feel unsettled or even unimportant. And then they draw back and feel cautious. They may not say anything directly, but their engagement in therapy decreases. A therapist allows a number of sessions, for instance, to run over unpredictably. For one client, this may feel generous, and they respond with gratitude. For another, it feels confusing and boundaryless, so it creates uncertainty. We have to know about those boundaries and how the client's going to respond if anything goes wrong. Even small inconsistencies can activate and reactivate early instability, boundary confusion, and a feeling of not being seen and valued. In this case, the therapist's task is to maintain consistency, clarity, and reliability, not rigidly, but consciously and in response to the client's needs. This creates what I call foundational trust, a sense that the relationship is built on a strong base. Now let's look at the inner relationship, what I call affective connection. This is the emotional core of therapy, where the client feels seen, heard, understood, and validated. In that way, therapy can progress, and those things that need to change can develop and shift. Most important in the inner relationship is the holding environment. This is the words of Donald Winnicott, that every child and every person needs to have this sense of being held in the world. And in this way, the therapist creates a psychological environment where the client is understood and contained. In that way, they can soften their defenses, feel supported, able to be vulnerable, and begin to explore their own experience more freely. The client says, I always feel like I'm too much for people. The therapist responds calmly, I understand that's how you feel, but that is not my experience of you. You are not difficult to be with. This is not just reassurance, it's a corrective emotional reflection. Another example, client becomes silent and tearful. The therapist doesn't rush in, they stay present. After a pause, a silence, they say, something important is happening. Maybe you can't talk about it yet, but you can tell me when you feel ready. This validates the experience without interrupting it. It also signals an openness to receive whatever the client brings. The core process of the inner relationship is affective connection, which includes empathy, attunement and engagement, emotional regulation, so things don't feel out of control, but also gentle challenge. Without this inner dimension, therapy feels distant, mechanical, and with it, it becomes deeply human. In the deeper relationship, we have what I call resonant potency. Here we enter the unconscious field, where experience is symbolic, metaphoric, and somewhat amorphous, hard for us to get our mind, our conscious mind around. Communication tends to be implicit rather than explicit, and it's not easy to verbalize, yet it can be energetically powerful. At this level, there's a resonance between client and therapist. It may even be that there's a connection at some level with the client when they are not together in the same room or over the internet. The therapist and the client are resonating together. So a therapist feels a sudden stuckness during a session, yet nothing obviously has changed. They say, I notice a kind of heaviness right now, hard to describe. I wonder if that connects to anything you're experiencing. Client pauses and says, yes, I think I know what you mean. I have that feeling sometimes, I just don't know how to describe it. This is resonance, a shared energetic field that links therapist and client at this unconscious level, and in some way is beyond space and beyond time. Of course, we know about transference and countertransference as an experience that goes on in the relationship in therapy. So certain clients may experience the therapist as critical, abandoning, idealized. And in response, the therapist resonates with that and feels pressured or compelled to say something or protective. These are not distractions. These are not things to avoid. They are essential elements that help us work through relational issues. Rather than dismiss or intellectualize these experiences, we use them as crucial information to help the client be more fully in relationship. To this end, the therapist learns to tolerate ambiguity, reflect internally, often just let the mind wander, and use intuition responsibly. The deeper level of relationship requires maturity in the therapist, not just technique, but self-awareness and inner development. The mature therapist feels the power and potency of the relationship and uses it for the benefit of the client. In the greater relationship, we have what I call archetypal participation. Occasionally, therapy touches something greater, more profound. There's a moment that feels meaningful beyond explanation, deeply connecting, having a certain luminous quality. And sometimes you can feel it in the room. And also participating in a shared something beyond the known. So you're sitting with the client, the therapy is progressing as usual. Suddenly there's a pause, a significant silence, and the therapist and client become still. Something is happening. It has no words, but both participants feel it. It seems to last for a long time, but it actually is only a minute or two. And then something shifts, and the therapist says, well, that was something. And the client laughs in agreement. When the conversation resumes, it feels different. That moment was not planned or formulated, but both have participated in an experience that is archetypal, an aspect of the collective experience of all humankind. These experiences carry what might be termed transformative vitality. The therapist's role is not to inflate, make more of it, or dismiss it, but to be still and patient, to stay present, grounded, to accept and allow whatever happens, and to not analyze or intrude on the deeper experience. Every therapeutic relationship, in fact, every relationship, contains both real, genuine aspects and unreal aspects, which you might call projections. We cannot avoid the unreal aspects as they're inherent in our nature and even occur in very long-term marriages. In the early stages of therapy, the relationship is shaped by past experiences, unmet needs, certain unrealistic expectations, unconscious patterns and preconceptions, and also hopes, fears, and kind of inner restrictions. Clients think to themselves, I can see he's judging me. He really doesn't like me. So I know that I don't hold those attitudes. It's a fictional projection based on that client's past history. But I know the experience is compelling to the client. And I know that that has to be validated. But it does keep them from being fully engaged. And the sessions don't flow easily. So I have to work harder. I know the relationship is more unreal than real for the client. And I can feel that. Over time, as trust builds, the projections and transference tend to soften. The relationship becomes more grounded and authentic. The sessions flow naturally. I feel comfortable sharing more of myself. And there's more laughter and lightness in the session. I would like my client to laugh in every single session. It's important to realize that projections and transference are not always obstacles, and sometimes they're actually very positive. They can facilitate connection. They can allow trust to develop. And they're part of the process of healing. They only really need interventions when they distort reality significantly and interfere with the progress of therapy. Part of the task of the therapist is to facilitate the development of real relationship with the client and to decrease the amount of unreality that the client projects onto others and the world. The more reality, the less need for projection. One of the deepest aims of therapy is not just insight or symptom relief, but the development of a new capacity to form more real relationships. And this doesn't happen through instruction. It only happens through experience. You could say we're damaged in negative relationships and we heal through positive relationships. In therapy, we need to provide consistency, emotional connection, depth, and sometimes something more, so that the therapeutic relationship becomes a model, a lived experience, and ultimately a bridge from past patterns to new ways of being. Of course, this applies to the therapist as much as to the client. We have to become specialists in relating, and that entails that we develop clear boundaries modulated with compassion, a real comfort with ourselves and our own inner world, a connection with our own unconscious processes, our dreams, our fantasies, our intuition, a tolerance for not knowing and allowing unforeseen experiences to arise. Most of all, we have to accept and understand our own relational patterns and develop a capacity for self-love and dispassionate love of others. This is the ultimate task of relationship, to accept and to give love. If these ideas resonate with your work, please subscribe and share. In the next video, I will explore therapeutic presence and how it facilitates connection at all levels of being. If you're interested in seminars and trainings, there is a link below, and you can click on that and you'll see what I'm offering at the moment.